are all set now for the our session.
Yes.
So we have another 30 seconds. So let's wait and then we'll
No problem.
start. So Disha-san, which part of India are you now today?
I'm in my office in Mumbai.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. So we are in 3 different cities. And the team is in Bangalore. So I think this is truly a connected world.
Yeah. It's one of the good outcomes of COVID. We've gotten
Very
comfortable with virtual meetings, and it's earlier we had to be forced to do this now, like it's par course. So I think that's
Yes,
that's
you get it. I have seen this even in at IIM. The professors used to be very reluctant to take any sessions. They said there is no connection, and I'm sure Dr. Hari will agree with you. But now, as you said, it's on path. People switch from regular classroom to the online session quite seamlessly.
yeah.
True.
So I think we are time. So let us start. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. All those in India and in Japan, and very good morning to those who have joined us from different parts of US and the continent. So welcome to MIJSC at IIMB. This webinar series is called Majin Bar. This series, we started it in August of 2020 when Corona was at its peak. And my name is Saidi Prasnam. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the center, which is a center of excellence at IIM Bangalore. The focus of this center has always been to strengthen India and Japan bonds by promoting academic, industry, and societal linkage. And this webinar series is actually one such attempt wherein bringing experts from both these countries as well as from outside and to talk about societal, technological, business, and other aspects of life, highlighting both Indian and Japanese and global perspectives. This webinar is actually the 19th in the overall series since we started in August of 2020. But this is the second in terms of panel discussion format. The others have always been an expert talk or expert discussion. And today we have very lucky to have 2 eminent personalities with us. One from the academic world and the other from the business world. Professor Hari is the first of the 2 panelists, and he works at the policy think tank. It is called the Global Development Research Center, or GDRC. It is located in Kobe, in Japan. He has worked in the United Nations system for more than 30 years, predominantly in the UN Environmental Program, based in Osaka, Japan, and the UN University is located in Tokyo. He has worked in UN systems for more than 20 years, predominantly, as I said, in the environmental areas. So, but apart from that, he has held professorship at various Japanese and overseas universities, teaching global environmental policy and related topics. He is a master's in urban development and management from the Asian Institute of Technology and Bangkok, Thailand. And he also a PhD from Tokyo Institute of Technology in Tokyo. His work mainly focuses on local environmental issues, working with local governments and national ministries of uh, developing countries with which Japan is linked and the UN is linked. Besides global and urban issues, his current interests range from information management, rural development issues, to community innovativeness, disaster management, and also non-governmental agencies, their development. Along with him, we have another uh, very prominent personality, Diksha Bhatt. She is a sustainability professional with 3 decades of work experience in consulting and corporate setup. She is currently the group's chief sustainability officer for the Aditya Birla Group. It's one of the very prominent business groups in India and in the world, because Aditya Birla is a very well diversified organization or a company. She drives the sustainability business transformation agenda across all its locations, whether in India or outside, linking it to the strategic, operational, communication, and advocacy aspect of this very interesting field of sustainability. And prior to this, she has worked in similar roles in Hindalco across many geographies. Over the years, through her work at prestigious firms like PwC, EY, Engineers India, Chemtech, Diksha San has worked across many diverse industry sectors. And she's a regular speaker. Many of you must have seen her as a panelist at sustainability events across India and the world. And she has been at the forefront of sustainability agenda in India through participation in working groups, industry bodies, as well as network of experts in this field of sustainability. I would like to welcome both of you to this forum, and I would like to set the context for this discussion today. I will start with the structure. So we will start with each of the panelists presenting an introductory note about what their thoughts are on the subject. This will be followed by a discussion with the moderator, which is myself. And at the end of it, we will have a Q&A session with the audience. So please do type in your questions as and when they occur to you. Do not wait till the end. The theme for today's discussion is a topic that is literally very hot. The topic is sustainable growth a mirage? And subtitle is Indian Japanese approaches to building growth ecosystem. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will give you a context for this discussion that we are going to have in the next 60 to 70 minutes. As I mentioned earlier, it's a great day that we have two such stalwarts with us today to discuss this emerging topic. And to set the context, let me explain first to begin with the choice of the theme itself. The reason why we selected this theme is that, generally speaking, sustainability and growth are considered as two terms that are at the ends of a spectrum. So, economic growth is always considered to be at the expense of resources or environment, because resources must be exploited to the fullest in order to ensure that growth happens or economic growth happens, sustains. But if the resources are shrinking, then there is a global tug of war. And so what should be happen? That means economic growth will take a hit. And therefore, we look at it, this conundrum, whether these two are indeed ends of a spectrum, or as some experts have started to looking at it, that this binary approach to sustainability and growth is itself not sustainable. That is what experts these days are saying. And incorporating sustainability principles within the decision-making process at starting from the global. That's why we have a united effort here. National and corporate levels, because we have also experts in Japan, from Japan and India, to discuss this and how the various stakeholders could be convinced or linked. And the hypothesis is that this approach would help build an ecosystem leading to a concrete action for sustainable development for companies and nations. And so let us see what these two panelists have to say on this, as I said, hot topic. So over to you, Professor Hari, for your introductory talk on this subject.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, let me thank the center for inviting me here. I hope I do justice for the invitation. Allow me please to share my screen.
Yes, it is clear.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening. What I'm going to talk about today is how do we set up an ecosystem for sustainability in the business sector. Essentially, remember the word ecosystem, essentially means creating a support system. How can organizations, people, resources, all these things come together in a mutually supporting system for the keyword for today, which is sustainability. Much of what, as the moderator raised, much of what I'm going to talk about comes from lessons that I learned in Japan in terms of working with the government agencies, working with local governments, working with business sector organizations and businesses themselves. More in terms of an outside looking in, meaning how can we set up organizations and institutions that can support the business sector. And in terms for Japan, the major commitments to sustainable development comes from the Paris Agreement, the most recent one, 2015, on climate change, where Japan made a commitment to reduce 25% of its CO2 emissions. That's a significant commitment Whether it will be able to do it or not is a different matter. But the point is the commitment is there. And along with that Paris Agreement came this also Sustainable Development Goals itself, SDGs. They're quite familiar with that. And Japan has played a very important role both in its development itself in the UN system, but also with its deployment domestically, globally and domestically. For a particular importance for us here in this session today is Sustainable Development Goal 13, which calls for urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. That's where sustainability focuses on for a major part. What is interesting about the whole the approach of Japanese government is how they have devolved these global commitments, whether it is Paris Agreement is just one commitment globally that they're made for climate change. There are other commitments on biodiversity, desertification, and a whole lot of other commitments that are made at the UN system. But what is interesting for us here is how they have taken these. It's not just enough if you sign the Paris Agreement, you have to bring it down to the local level. And that's where the Japanese government has done a good job of taking these commitments to the UN system, but also converting it into national policies. For example, the one on Junkangata Shakai. Junkangata Shakai literally means a sound material cycle society, a society that uses natural materials in a sound manner in terms of not just using less material, but also using it properly and keeping the natural cycles in place. That's the concept behind Junkangata Shakai. And even further devolve that national policy into regulations and rules at the local level, which is that continuum of action is what makes Japan's sustainability actions interesting. But an integrated approach, what we learn from Japan based on my work here in this country, is how they have taken an integrated approach. It's not just the government making a statement, or it's not just organizing an event, but really bringing all these different actors together, governments, consumers, business and industry, the civil society at large. For example, the governments, and it's not just bringing these people together, but identifying who does what in terms of, for example, policy, legal frameworks is the forte of governments. Consumers are very clearly focused on lifestyle changes and eco-consumerism. Business and industry in terms of cost-saving measures and that benefit the environment, etc. So bringing these different stakeholders together, businesses, consumers, local and national governments, essentially means that they understand what their priorities are, what their roles are. For example, business very clearly in terms of sustainability, they're looking at avoiding disruptions due to environmental risk, reducing overall costs about water savings, energy efficiency, waste minimization, etc. There are costs to this. If you reduce these costs, it is good for the businesses. Consumers, again, are focused, their priorities is on purchasing eco products and adopting environmentally friendly lifestyles, etc. Understanding these priorities, defining their roles is a very interesting aspect of the Japanese ecosystem, where each stakeholder has a very clear role to play, identified role to play. And I like to always use this figure in terms of the three legs of sustainability. Japan's approach to sustainability has been tightly integrating action by the three legs: business and industry, civil society, national and local governments. Understand how each of these three stakeholders work together. Collective decision making. No one takes a unilateral decision unless and until everyone else has agreed to it. Everybody works together. That collective decision making in terms of making sure people are consulted, their views are taken. It's not just ordinary citizens, but it's also businesses, business groups, etc. So when the overall, so the businesses also have responded to this call for sustainability. And their two main goals is material efficiency, energy efficiency. Material, well, it's the input material that goes into their manufacturing and their business activity, whatever it is, whether it's energy, whether it is minerals, whether it is water, etc. Make sure that these materials, natural materials, are used efficiently. Simultaneously, along with that is energy efficiency. Make sure that energy is used properly, renewable energy is used, etc. This goes with the goals of reducing risks, saving costs, and maximizing profits. This is business language that you can understand, but saving costs in terms of sustainability, whether it is material or energy efficiency. Maximizing profits. How do you find a market? By providing eco goods, for example, eco products. Yeah, those kind of things, using sustainability within their business language of reducing risk, saving costs, maximizing profits, etc. So environmental risk, climate change has been a very important aspect of business sentiment here in Japan. For example, the environmental risk in terms of water savings, energy savings, material savings. How can this not only reduce costs, but also at the same time create profit? Climate change also. How can we produce less waste, for example, or less pollution, less greenhouse gas emissions? All this, what I have done is created a survey of business sentiments about the environment and sustainable development. I've come up with these 5 eco measures that you frequently see coming up in Japan. The first one is resource input measures. Measures that control the resources that are input into the manufacturing process. Obviously, energy efficiency, I've already mentioned that by reducing the overall energy use, conservation of energy use, water conservation, etc. Recycling and waste reduction. This is a key element of the Junkangata Shakai that I told earlier. Packaging, how do you reduce the amount of packaging that can reduce the amount of resources that go into it, etc. The second is pollution prevention measures. Most industries have gone into a significant amount of air pollution and water pollution prevention, especially in the last 20, 30 years. Management measures, the ISO 14001 has been enthusiastically adopted by Japanese industry, covering environmental management systems. How do you create a whole management system around the environment within the businesses? That's the core of ISO 14001, which you must be familiar with. The other 2 remaining measures that you frequently see in the industry in Japan is non-production measures like environmental building design, eco-office, etc., and community measures, the larger issue of CSR, environmental philanthropy, etc. So if you take all these, what I've learned from Japan is there are some patterns in which sustainability action is implemented. The first is the stakeholder pattern. A stakeholder pattern is making sure that everyone is involved. The second one is the levels, making sure measures are devolved from the global level, where the United Nations is predominantly functioning, to the national level, and finally to the local level. Bring these three levels together in terms of actions and activities. The third is action itself, making sure actions in the governance, education, and technology are taken. Okay, let's take these three issues. The first, of course, is stakeholder pattern. Whether making sure that governments, business and industry, and NGOs and civil society work together. It's not enough if you just tell the businesses, do this, do that, but you need to bring this whole thing together. There is a need for support, and whether it is knowledge, whether it is resources that businesses need in terms of adopting sustainability principles. And what we clearly see in Japan is these three stakeholders working together. Of course, there are others like universities, business groups, chambers of commerce, etc., all working together. And that's the first key lesson that we learn in terms of stakeholders working together. It's not just the businesses working alone, but it's this entire group of people coming together. The second pattern that you see, as I said, is this global, national, local levels. What you see is a clear integration between commitments and activities that Japan does at the UN level or at the global level, which is devolved appropriately into national policies like the Junkangata Shakai I mentioned earlier, but also further down into the local level, where you see the local governments picking up these national policies into local regulations. For example, the separation of waste. We have a very clear waste separation system in place here, whether it is for households or for businesses, essentially to promote recycling and proper waste resource conservation. Yeah, so this is an interesting element of the Japanese system, but of course, the final one is action itself. It's not enough if you just assume that businesses will take action. We need to provide them with support from different elements. The governments, for example, are primarily responsible for providing laws, legislation, regulations, etc., for the businesses. The civil society, including universities, consumer groups, trade unions, etc., are responsible or take action in the education sphere. With raising awareness, PR, public relation campaigns, etc., are more common. And of course, the businesses themselves, which are responsible for technology, contribute to sustainable development. But this is the main lesson, if you want me to encapsulate it, that I learned in Japan: governance, education, and technology. So ultimately, what you see is this obsession of sustainable policies becoming lifestyle choices. Ultimately, sustainability is not something that happens in Africa or in Antarctica or somewhere in the clouds, but it happens here. It happens in our houses. It happens in our businesses. Lifestyle choices is the approach that Japan has taken when it comes to core sustainability policies, whether it is in terms of governance, ensuring that there are proper laws, legislations, rules, etc., whether it is education in terms of scenario development, awareness campaigns, knowledge development, etc., but also technology in a broader sense of the word, in terms of solutions, techniques, even skills, knowledge to use the technologies, etc., so that technology can contribute to sustainable development. So this governance, education, technology is the key approach that you see by Japan to meet its sustainability challenges. So As I said earlier, governance in terms of laws and legislation and governance systems, both institutions, but also policies, education, not just for businesses, but also for communities, for consumers, for all these people, but a technology eventually. Yeah. So the key point here is who has to do what. What you see with this governance, education, technology continuum is also the question of who has to take action. Governance obviously is the forte of governments implemented by national and local governments. Educational solutions implemented by civil society, whether it is NPOs, consumer groups, universities, etc. Technology solutions implemented by the businesses themselves. So if you bring all these three patterns together, the global, national, and local level governance, governments, businesses, and industry, civil society, what you get is a matrix. You get a matrix, a table of 9 cells, each of which has to cover the 3 actions: governance, education, and technology. What can we governments do at the global, national, and local levels in terms of governance, education, and technology? Even though government is still predominantly focused on governance, they still have a role to play, of course, in education and technology. Similarly, when it comes to businesses, what can businesses do at the global level, at the national level, at the local level? Businesses now are meeting in Davos for the World Economic Forum this week. What are they talking about when it comes to sustainability? What are Japanese businesses doing there? That's at the global level. The World Business Council of Sustainable Development also is a major forum where Japanese businesses are active in the sustainability sphere. National level and then local level. Same with civil society. Recently, the civil society, NGOs, universities, etc., are playing a more predominant role in supporting governments at the UN as major actors or major groups, as they're called in the UN system. You have civil society, NGOs, universities working at the global level, at the national level, and at the local level. So understanding who is doing what at which level is an interesting part of this, what I call the GET matrix, governance, education, technology matrix. So you have the regulatory environment, governance in terms of laws and regulations, eco-labeling, for example, product and waste tracking, public hearings, all these things taken, action taken by the Japanese government in terms of influencing everyday lifestyle choices. Remember that sustainability for Japan is lifestyle. Yeah, lifestyle choices we make on a daily basis. Similarly, education also, when it comes to raising awareness, education, providing proper information for everyday lifestyle choices again. But eventually, of course, especially in terms of businesses, it comes to technology and product development. How do we make sure products are properly labeled to understand its contribution to sustainability? Life cycle approach, I'm sorry. How do you look at the entire life cycle of a product, not just its final status? Packaging systems designed for the environment. How do you look at designing products for the environment, not just for convenience or for beauty, but also for the environment, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a very rapid fire presentation that I wanted to share with you today. I'll leave you with this matrix, a matrix of action for cognizant, understanding how things work, collective and consensus-driven decision-making towards sustainability. That's what we learn from Japan in terms of no one person takes the decision. It's always collective decision-making. It's always consensus decision-making. You don't just implement a law, but you make sure that the businesses are on board, They call them up even before the law is implemented. They call them up for hearings, get their views, get their agreement, only then implement or promulgate a law. So this consensus decision-making, collective decision-making is something that we quite frequently see in Japan in terms of sustainability. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Professor, very thankful, very, I would say, brief as well as in-depth. So it's a combo. So thank you. It's an excellent job. So we will get back to you on this GET matrix, which or GET model that you have presented, and explore this in more detail subsequently. Now you have given both an administrative as well as an academic approach to this wonderful topic. Let us hear from Diksha-san, her maybe more hands-on approach, because she has been a business leader in this field. And let's see what she has to say about it. Welcome. You are on mute.
Yes, thank you. Do you, please, can you confirm if
You can see the slide.
Yeah, and it is visible?
It is visible. You can make it into a presentation mode.
Okay, please confirm that as well once you see that. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Quite exciting. And, it's always a pleasure to come speak. And I wish it was not virtual, because while it makes it very easy to be from where you are, but then I think the kind of energy that one draws from the audience, from the two of you here, Professor Hari and yourself, Mr. Ratnam, I think that's of a very different order, but I am grateful to be invited here. I'm also, let me start by how, I sent out my reflections of 2022 to overall, my colleagues in ABG. And in December, we have our annual Chairman's Awards, which is like coming together of quite a few of us. Okay, I was still on my story. What he wants us to, he reflects on how the year has gone by and kind of gives his view on how we should be looking ahead. And when he talked about ESG, he said that, how do we accelerate ESG, because ESG is the term that we are using, environment, social, and governance, in some sense to be a currency of how we are looking at sustainability. And I could link it to, he wants us to make it, mainstream it to the way we think about it or look at business. And it connected so well to what the Japanese fans responded when they were asked, why are they cleaning the stadium after the matches are over? And while Professor Hari, you can correct me if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but they said, what's there to think? It's atarimai. That, it's obvious. So in my reflection, I said, how can sustainability become atarimai to ABGs should be our goal. So I wanted to tell this little story of using Japanese terms in the way we are thinking. So very inspiring to hear from you, Professor Hari. We did speak when we were preparing for this about what does it, Mr. Ratnam, you spoke about, are we okay with this topic of, do we agree, not agree, is sustainable growth a mirage? And I mentioned it to you there, and I kind of was thinking about it. I said, what does it even mean? Like, First, we have to be able to say what is sustainable and what is growth and how do they come together. So, when you just Google the word, you say sustainable meaning, it throws up two meanings for sustainable. It says it sustainable, one meaning it shows up is what we are now talking about sustainable in recent years. When it says involving the use of natural products, energy in a way that it does not harm the environment. But it's the number two, I presume, that we were talking about. It's that can continue to or be continued for a long time. And growth is the process of growing. So if we put it together, sustainable growth would mean continuing to grow for a long time. And if we look at both meanings, so I could therefore link it back to, so if we were to answer what is sustainability, I like this whole linkage that we can make to the 6 blind men and the elephant story, that, whoever touched the trunk thought that's the elephant and the ears and whatever. So it is, somebody would say, oh, it's about the enterprise risk management. Is it about corporate social responsibility? Is it about environmental protection? But much like the whole, when you look at the elephant as a whole, it's the elephant and not its legs, or it is its legs and trunk and the body. So sustainability is all of these, and therefore, if we just stay with what it means in etymologically, that it comes from the word sustain, Latin word, which says it can maintain, support, hold. So if we were to link it to a corporate or a business's sustainability, or even for us as society, what it would mean is that ability of the society, its citizens, corporates to sustain, to be around as we face various trends, various events that are happening around us. This what I think today is the 354th day of the war. So a lot that is lot that's happening around, and initially sometimes we think it'll not happen or it'll go away quickly, etc. But we don't. So therefore, to think and be in a way that how do we deal with these things that get thrown at us is the ability to sustain, is how I find it much easier to communicate and talk about it. And therefore, then the next question comes is whose sustainability, after you've defined. And because that's that ability to be around, we also have to remember, because one of the good, very stark lessons that we learned from being locked up is we saw everything became so nice. You would have all seen these pictures of highways looking fantastic from the NCPA in Marine Drive. You could see dolphins. So everything very clean nature. So nature will bounce back. But do we have that kind of resilience as individuals and corporates? Makes it very clear that when we talk about sustainability, it's our sustainability. So we should not think that we're trying to protect Mother Earth and Mother Earth can protect itself. We have to talk about it. It's our sustainability. Then next question is, when you look at it all together, what does it mean for a business? When we recontextualize it, what does it mean? And if we simplistically look at what business means, is that it is basically about that. This is a very simple way of looking at it, that you have some inputs, that you get raw materials, you use ecosystem services, you use some assets and systems, whether it's physical assets, people, and we use that to make some products or services, which we sell as a business. And these all operate across geographies and timelines in view of two things: the trends that are playing out and what different stakeholders are expecting. And therefore, for a corporate, two fundamental questions that would determine their ability to sustain. First is, are we recognizing those external factors factors and externalities across the value chain, both for what opportunities that they are offering and the risks that they are posing. And second is, are we working on our ability to survive and thrive in all these constraints and changes and expectations from different stakeholders, both internal and external. So internal, it could be, it's our employees, our contractual or permanent, and external could be many other this thing. For example, okay, what is happening? Yeah. And I'll come to some examples like suppliers, like customers, like whatever. So if I was to just link it back to, I've left you with two terms here, mega trends and expectations from stakeholders. So that's how I'm going to build now the rest of our conversation. That when we talk about these mega trends, it's broadly in these five buckets that, in environment, these are the big ones that we are seeing, or many more, but largely a lot of conversation is on climate change and on biodiversity loss. In December 2022, we saw both the conference of parties happening in a very short span of each other, the COP27, first ever Africa COP on climate change, and COP15 on biodiversity, which happened in Canada, as a follow-on to some discussions that had already happened in Asia. And then, of course, deforestation, the plastics everywhere. In environment, that's what we're hearing about. In macroeconomics, multipolar world and becoming increasingly so with more protectionism. In technology, I don't know if you guys are seeing, but I think it was yesterday that I was reading that now a newer version of that chat GPT is coming along. So a lot happening there very fast in terms of society, because that's where we hire our employees, that's where our suppliers are, our customers are. Urbanization and overpopulation, a trend increasing, while we are saying India is the second largest now and soon to become largest. One does not know the numbers, maybe we already are. Very hyper-connected, everybody's on the phone, social media. And the awareness of, because of technology and this hyperconnectivity, awareness of human rights issues, inequality and inequity in societies is also very high. And then linked to, underplaying or overarching all of this is the way political trends are playing out. So all of these come together and impact the way we are thinking, looking at about businesses. And we plan both what we do now, what we do in future. How these trends are therefore impacting is that, Davos next week. So a lot of reports come out and a lot has been thrown to us in this last 1 week. For example, one very interesting thing I came across when we are in the process of finalizing our climate change vulnerability assessment framework. And what really struck was this Bloomberg news item, which said that before 2005, industry losses never topped close to 50 billion a year, which is now hitting 120. So imagine the insurance linked to extreme weather. So one data point. So just couple of days back, I think yesterday, this 12th UNGC and Accenture CEO studies got published, and where the top headline there is that the global sustainability agenda is totally off track. There's a dramatic rise in intersectional global challenges, which is forcing CEOs to navigate an unprecedented uncertainty. So therefore, and they're talking about, it links back to what I just spoke about, that the top 5 challenges that the CEOs are talking about are on inflation and price volatility, linked to the war that's happening, and also the impact on supply chains, residual impacts from COVID. Talent scarcity is number 2. A threat to public health. So again, coming out of just having come out of the pandemic, or I don't know if we've come out of it, not, but because China is in the midst of it, climate change and then trade regulations. And then, therefore, what the message is coming across is that sustainability is emerged at the core of resilience, and it's not only climate imperative, but also the foundation for security, growth, and resilience. So, the trends, what are the kind of impacts that are showing up? And therefore, I talked about two terms, the impact, the trends, and then the stakeholder expectations. And when we talk about, say, these four kinds of stakeholders, the consumers, investors, employees, and regulators for a business, each of them, one can see, are getting hugely influenced by many of these trends, which thereby impact the ability of a business to sustain in times to come. Consumers, Nielsen, this is slightly dated, but Nielsen data showed that sustainability-linked brands grow 4 times faster. TCFD is, this number is now higher than $22 trillion. More than 70% of millennials expect their employers to focus on societal or mission-driven problems, and regulators are coming up with various this thing. If I was to just kind of link this to the WEF report that came out earlier this week, it is showing that for the next 2 years, and it's interesting, you would see that both for the 2-year horizon, the short term, as well as the 10-year horizon, none of the risk categories are economic. They are either environmental, geopolitical, or technological. So it's very interesting that this is coming out. And when we talk about 10-year horizon, you can see out of the top 10, 6 are related to environment. And if we were to read this risk ranking with the severity of risk also, you can see that in the top right, the risks that are sitting there are around natural disasters and extreme weather. And, whether we look closer home on what's happening in Joshimath, or, a little away in what's happened in, say, in California, when the storm hit, and one of the most expensive homes, one of the towns with most expensive homes, including that of Harry and Meghan, they were asked to evacuate. So, what's happening to our people in Joshimath was happening to some very wealthy people in California. So, it's all around us and is playing out, therefore, in terms of how regulations and disclosure expectations are growing exponentially, whether it's the companies and investors who are facing this pressure from the whole TCFD piece. You can see everywhere across the globe, the investors and the companies are now expected to be talking about, the regulators want them to talk about how they are looking at climate. International Sustainability Board has published 2 new draft standards last year. In Europe, a lot is happening, whether it's on the SFDR or whatever, or the Green Bond Standard, or even the whole CSDDD, where European Commission is expecting corporates to present their sustainability due diligence. And similarly, the whole BRSR, which is now mandatory, being mandated by SEBI in India. So a lot on disclosures, a lot on the way you look at financing. So those trends showing those impacts are nudging for regulations to become stronger, more far-reaching. And even in terms of, if we were to stay with the finance or around sustainability, you can see almost, with the exception of the African subcontinent, the Africa as continent, everywhere there's either an active regulation or a guideline or proposed regulation on how you could raise funds around using the whole ESG piece. So what this has led to is what CEOs are thinking and saying on sustainability. When I refer back to the whole ENG 6 Venture study, what's very interesting is from 2013 to 2022, the shift that you would see, the number has gone from 83% to 98%, where CEOs are now saying they are accountable for how sustainability is getting mainstreamed. And what is also very interesting is how, because it's CEO's responsibility and not, I always say a safety or a sustainability professional can't make you a safe or sustainable. We are just about kind of, call to action, bringing people together, but actual accountability lies with the people who are running, whether it's the strategy people, the HR looking at workforce and organization, the procurement team looking at supply chain and data, the operations team looking at ecosystem management. So just all of it coming up as we say, how do we enhance our ability to sustain in times to come? And since megatrends offer both risks and opportunities, that's another very important area to look at. I'll use the example of megatrend of resource scarcity, how it plays out, that it has an operational impact that you would have lesser resources. Therefore, you would need to find alternative materials. You would need to look for newer technology. You would need to create those closed loop of manufacturing. But it also offers excellent opportunities in terms of newer brands, newer circular brands. If I talk about it from Aditya Birla Group perspective, newer offerings. We have now 5 brands that are circular in different parts of Aditya Birla Group businesses. So to understand that megatrends offer both risks and opportunities is another important thing which would make sustainability or ESG and RMI for corporates. How we built all of this together for Aditya Birla Group is that we are taking a 4-dimensional approach. It's a little busy slide. I'm just going to quickly talk about the 4 dimensions. First being, are you understanding what's the uniqueness, the operational uniqueness of the sector that you're operating in, geography you're operating in, which part of the value chain you are in, and how do you use time as a dimension to ultimately understand what is the internal context, the strengths and weaknesses, external context in terms of risks and opportunities, to come up with the material ESG issues, and have the leadership direction and aspiration when it all comes together, would give a sustainable business strategy, which you convert into time-based targets and action plan, and deliver it through these enablers of right people for the right jobs, systems being in place, right assets, right technologies, and work with other people, because you can't go alone. So use of partnerships and platforms. This is the approach that we've been taking at Aditya Birla Group, which is kind of through use of this, we've come up with what are the areas that we would focus on in terms of environment, in terms of social. Social is all about people. So therefore, what do we do for employees? What do we do for the communities around us, around our manufacturing locations, and also communities at large, with our suppliers, with our customers? So, the whole product and services stewardship in terms of the customers that we serve. And then governance is about transparency through the use of digital tool IT systems, and then, of course, the whole corporate governance piece. So bringing it all together, we're looking at 16 areas that we've chosen to work on in each of these. It's, as you can see, in environment, 1 and 2 are around climate change, decarbonizing as well as adapting that the climate has indeed changed, biodiversity, water resilience, and similarly in social, it's about the employees, which is on health and safety, human rights, talent, working with supply chains, empowering communities. So these are the 16 areas. And, now all Aditya Birla Group businesses are reporting on sustainability performance in some form. 3 of our listed companies have been publishing integrated reports. Novelis, which is our downstream aluminium business, actually publishes a purpose for progress report, because they've defined their purpose as shaping a sustainable world together. So how are they progressing on living the purpose is how they publish the report. All businesses have, in some form, their commitments and targets on ESG, depending on their sector and geography, developing roadmaps and action plans. They are in different stages of development, and we're getting recognized for our performance in their sectors of operation. For example, Hindalco has been rated as most sustainable company by S&P Global and DJSI, Birla Cellulose by Canopy, Ultratech by Sustain Labs Paris, Birla Carbon by EcoVadis. So I'll stop here. Thank you once again for having me here, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. I think you have given not just Aditya Birla or a corporate, but also an overall perspective of how businesses are looking at. And I was very happy to see that 98% of CEOs are in fact environmentally aware and conscious about it. And the way you talked about both risk and opportunities was also very interesting, and we will explore these aspects in greater detail in the quick discussions that we are going to have. And in fact, both of you have given a broad view of all your thoughts on the subject. So, if I may address the first set of questions to Dr. Hari. As we discussed, Dr. Hari, GET model, very interesting, very inspiring, especially in terms of multi-stakeholder approach to building such a multi-stakeholder approach. Just to understand this model better, I have two questions for you. First is working with such large number of organizations can be difficult. I being not a Japanese, I find it very challenging. So what are the various ways that Japanese system ensures the smooth operation of a multi-stakeholder approach, because they have ingrained it in their societal approach to problem solution. The second part of the question is, as per you, how can this be replicated in other countries which have a slightly different, I would say more individualistic approach to problem solving? Mr. Hari?
Sorry, thank you. No. I think it's a very interesting element of the Japanese business sector that there are groups, associations of industry associations, for example. Even though you have other businesses or industries that are essentially your competitors, there are certain elements that link them together, whether it is their supply chains, whether it is their common concerns and challenges, some of which Deeksha raised. But industry associations or business groups are very common element in Japan. So all the restaurants, for example, are joined together in associations. Manufacturers of a particular product join together to form a group. These groups become, rather than targeting individual businesses, the governments, when they make their consultations and hearings with the private sector, they target these groups. That's how they work. They consult with the groups, headquarters or secretariats, which then further devolve into their individual members. So the consultation process is pretty established. When you have a large number of stakeholders, they bring them together into groups or associations or even non-profit organizations. It can include customers. Customer groups around the country can be brought together into one national system with which for example, the Ministry of Economics, Trade and Industry can communicate and interact. And that message, both ways, will be taken from that association. So that's a simple answer to your first question, where the organization of these individual companies is brought together into an association or a business group. And that's something that can easily be replicated in other countries as well. The question, of course, comes into how do you form a group with essentially groups, businesses that are your competitors. But then, as Deepsha very clearly brought out, there are certain common concerns, challenges that face all these businesses, irrespective of where they are in terms of profitability or where competition. But these common challenges and issues should bring them together into an association. And that can be easily used as a target for top-down or bottom-up communications of the various issues you want to discuss and take decisions to take.
Great. I think I would say many businesses or many organizations are getting established and getting beefed up. I think it is, I'm sure that we will hear from about how this aspect, how it can be used more powerfully in India. But he gave a very interesting perspective that whether that 98% was globally or within India, that we will come to when we discuss with her. But the second question that I wanted to understand, we wanted to understand, is that Japan seems to have a vision set, I think, based on the UN declaration, to become a leader towards a future where economic, social, and environmental improvements are attained, integrated, sustainable, resilient manner, while leaving no one behind. So you did mention about how policies, governmental policies, regulations, etc., are one of the key pillars of EET. So can you give us an example of something that would help create, especially through the legislative process, which will help to create an integrated, sustainable, and resilient improvement approach?
No, it's the whole question of Junkangata Shakai that I mentioned earlier. Junkangata Shakai is sound material cycle society. One of the elements of that is, for example, energy efficiency, making sure you use energy efficiently in terms of not only using less material, but also producing less CO2, energy efficiency. And this Junkangata Shakai policy comes out of the commitments, as I said, that Japan has made globally. But Junkangata Shakai is still very conceptual, it's very abstract in its approach. How does it really mean to you and me at the local level? It means energy efficiency means providing the incentives for businesses to, for example, one example is LED bulbs. How do you convert all the ordinary bulbs into LED? So the Junkangata Shakai provided an impetus for the businesses to produce LEDs. Now LED bulbs are more commonly available in supermarkets, in convenience stores, in electrical shops than ordinary bulbs. Ordinary bulbs are practically gone in Japan. So in terms of you and me at the local level, what we are seeing of Junkangata Shakai, as one example, is LED bulbs. So LED bulbs is a technology resulting from the push towards Ajunkangata Shakai, which came out of Japan's commitment at the global level. That link is there. So we are seeing, for example, as I said earlier, waste. In any Japanese city, you have to separate your waste into anywhere from 4 to 30 different categories. In the city of Minamata, you have to separate your bottles into green bottles, blue bottles, transparent, all colors of the spectrum. So there is this commitment to recycle materials, and that commitment to recycle at the local level for you and me is waste separation, which then supports businesses to recycle their materials, which comes out of a policy at the national level, for example, Junkangata Shakai, that came out of a global commitment at the UN. So this devolution of commitments at the global level to local aspects which are regulations that affect our lifestyle choices is a very interesting thing. For example, single-use plastics is practically gone now. In terms of shopping bags, we have to pay now to get shopping bags. So it's encouraging people to bring their own bags, which means that our decision to take our own bags to the supermarket is influenced by a government decision to ban plastics, which is again influenced by Japan's global commitment towards climate change. So that's so influencing sustainability. The goal of sustainability is approached from sustainable lifestyle choices that we make, that you and me make on a daily basis. I think that's an interesting element where we cannot disconnect, because ultimately the consumer is king. So it's a consumer's choices that influences a business's sustainability policies, which influences government regulations, which influences the discussions that are happening at the global level. Consumer choices at the local level, you and me, our everyday, whether we drink a cup of coffee or a tea, is what that will finally influence what is happening at the World Economic Forum today. I mean, it's for us to make that linkages, to understand that our choices on a daily basis has an influence on the global environment and vice versa. I think that we need to keep in mind.
In fact, many of these things that you mentioned about waste segregation, it has started happening in India. Some awareness is starting to build up, and in many societies where we are living today, apartment complexes, I mean, this becomes mandatory that if you do not segregate waste, it will not be collected. So from your doorstep or wherever it is. And I think these type of awareness is started now, but you in Japan, you seem to have taken it to the next level in the sense that 30 different categories. I think it is mind-boggling. I mean, we find it even green and wet and non-wet, and itself a challenge. So it will take some time, but I think other example of LED, again, something that it is happening in India, in as you rightly mentioned, regular fluorescent lighting is becoming dated. It's not available in most shops. Yeah, I think.
No, but I think. Sorry, go ahead. No, I just wanted to Diksha's comment on Atarimae. I think that was an interesting keyword there. It's common sense. Atarimae literally means common sense. It means that we simply have to do it. it's built. It has to be built into our everyday choices. We see, for example, we see two groups of apples in the supermarket, which is 100 rupees and 150 rupees. Your hand automatically goes to the 100 rupees apple because it's cheaper and you want to save money. Why can't we make our common decisions more environmentally friendly, so much more atharimaya, a common sense approach to environment? I think that's what we need. And ultimately, that's what we are seeing in Japan, this atharimaya decision-making, where it's obvious, you have to do it. It's there. I mean, why are you even questioning it? Kind of approach. And Diksha was right about the comments by the Japanese fans. Atarimai, why shouldn't we clean up the the places where they played? I think that's an interesting element that we can learn from. Looking at our own cultures, looking at our own values, our own communities, to see where the solutions can be built up. We're not just talking of transferring. The Japanese don't know anything more than what we already know. But it's looking at ourselves, looking at our own communities, looking at our own societies, in order to build up that momentum of atharimai, common sense for sustainability. I think we have frozen.
I can hear you and I can see you.
Sorry.
I think we lost Mr.
Shivam?
Ratnam.
We'll try to reach him, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there's another word, Diksha, that goes with atharimai. It's mottainai. In Kannada, in Karnataka, in Kannada, we have this irli bekagate. Irli bekagate is let it be, we may need it in the future. So that mottainai is also has a similar meaning, where it's a wasteful to throw it away. And I think that is also picking up momentum within the Japanese society, that we have to be it's not just a question of separating waste into 32 categories as Minamata city is doing, but it's a question of not using it in the first place, not using so much material in the first place. And that's where mottainai and other such atharimai and those kind of keywords are becoming more commonly used. And I think that's where we have, but the question really is, as I said earlier, how do we look at our own cultures? There's so much knowledge, there's so much value systems within our own cultures that we can use for a better sustainability approach, even thinking.
Yeah. No, and so for me, it was not so much about, so it is about learning from other cultures, but the use of that word was that when will it become obvious to us that sustainability needs to be a way of being? So it was about way of being, whether, and you could borrow from Japanese, there could be a word from Bhagavad Gita, so it could be from anywhere, but it's about ultimately whatever clicks for you, but saying that it has to just to come naturally to us. And it did come naturally to us in the times gone by. I was talking to another colleague sometime back, and it was like, I've grown up in a time in India when we would take shopping bags, cloth shopping bags, and nobody questioned it, and then came all those fancy plastic bags, and we used to get bottle milk in those recyclable glass bottles. But I think the more we moved away, and it first we created the waste, now we want to use the waste, and so it's just a very cyclical thing. Dr. Ratnam, there are many questions I can see on the chat, largely for Professor Hari. Do you want to take them? Because we just have 10 more minutes to go.
So, I think you guys have given a very interesting overview of and incisive elements about it. Incisive insight into the various elements involved. So one question which seems to be there on many people's mind, to both of you, Professor Hari, first, Japan seems to be a leader in many directions in terms of sustainability. And is it possible that it is because of the shortages that they have encountered in the World War II, or later on when the oil shock came, they could do more with less type of, the lean concept or lean thinking? So did that help them to get a leg up in this, and therefore give a leadership to the whole discussion?
No, that was very true. The oil shock, Lehman shock, as it's called, and many of these global events influenced Japan's thinking and its own vulnerabilities, economic and otherwise, a lot. See, Japan is, after all, a global economy, and it's dependent on global systems, economic and otherwise, on its survival. Japan's economy is described as a bicycle that has to be moving. If it stops, it falls down. So I think the question there really is, with Japan's dependence on the global system for its own survival, economic survival. I'll give you an example of food, which is easy for us to understand. Japan, on a calorific basis, depends on 60% of its calories on outside systems. 60% of its food is actually imported from outside. Japan is able to provide only 40% of its food by itself domestically. That's an incredible dependence on the global economy for its own survival. So obvious, and this is not, that's just food. And this is what, but when you talk of the economic system or production systems, then this becomes a much more complex picture of Japan, not an isolated system, but very well integrated into the global system. That introduces a number of risks, which you rightly raised, within the Japanese economy, and the need for a rethinking, if you want to call it, of their own survivability and their superiority. And that calls for certain changes within their economic system, within their lifestyle choices, both. That needs to be cognizant of these changes that are happening globally. They cannot be an island. They are an island, but they are not an island, in the sense that they are well integrated into the global economy and consequently are influenced by global changes, whether it is geopolitical issues like the Ukrainian war, or what the Lehman shocks, shortages from the World War II, etc. All these things have influenced thinking at the local level. Very true. And I think Japan has understood the degree of vulnerability that they face. And I'm not even talking of natural disasters, which Japan is much more influenced, whether it's earthquakes or whether it's tsunamis, typhoons, etc.
Right. To Diksha-san, one question which keeps coming, you did mention about that 98% of CEOs, which is a very impressive figure. Is this something which a survey in India or is it a global survey?
It's a global survey which Accenture and UN Global Compact have done. This is published usually in build-up to Davos. It's, I think, some 2,500 or 2,800 CEOs. So it's a very large number, but it's not India.
How is the scenario in India in terms of awareness?
I think with BRR and then now with BRSR being made mandatory for top 1,000 companies, so definitely that awareness is quite high, and also I think so. External pulls and pressures, whether it's the investors asking those questions, ESG rating agencies. So with the larger companies, it's definitely on one of the top agenda items with the management, and with the work that many of the larger companies are now doing in their supply chains, it's percolating. And similarly, some of the companies which supply to other parts of the world also, so therefore regulators, investors, customers asking for it is increasing it. But of course, on ground, given that one of the large ability to sustain challenge for our country is that we are still a developing country. We've got large number of people who do not have access to many basic things, and given that inequality is quite high, so a GDP of 2,000 plus is not very representative of everyone having, it is very skewed by some very rich people having a lot more money, and therefore the average per capita GDP looks what it looks. So therefore, I think that's why contextualization to geography is extremely important. That that sets that what does sustainability mean in a given context. So if for a poor country, sustainability means having access to food, access to a roof over your head, access to clothing, that the basic roti kapda makan has to happen before. But can we have that in a way that will have lesser impact on the environment going forward is a way to think. And that way, then it's quite encouraging the whole life initiative that Government of India has launched, that how can we have a lifestyle which is suited to environment. Yeah. So I think we're on the right path. Of course, it's a long way to go, but I'm an optimist, and I think it'll all turn out to be well. Yeah.
I have one slightly controversial or provocative question which I see here, that if the role and responsibility of a developed country to a developing country, as you rightly said, there is always a lag for a developing country to do everything. But many times, the rate at which we need to improve is sort of, it needs to become exponential, because the climate change is happening that much more exponentially. So the question here is, because manufacturing is being pushed to developing countries, which is the way, as you mentioned in our initial discussions also, that is the way the world is going. So what is the responsibility for the greenhouse? Suppose I am a consumer, which is what the richer countries are. What is their responsibility in terms of giving help terms of technology and other help to the developing countries, who are the real producers of, because they are the manufacturing hub. Therefore, they are producing the gases. What do you think?
Let me just raise one or 2 points before we move. One of the key things, for example, Japan is doing is using eco labels. This is every country has its own eco labels, including India. But Japan has very strictly implemented that and encouraged businesses to apply for their products to be stamped with an eco label. This is an interesting element because it's for the consumer, which is our ultimate target. This is easy to identify that this product is environmentally friendly. And it's not just that was eco labeling at the national level, but also sometimes at the local level, state governments or prefectural governments, as they're called here in Japan, also take action in terms of producing their own labels, which are not just environmental in character, but also culturally specific or some such thing. So these kind of labels is one way that we can encourage changing consumer behavior by providing the appropriate information. Eco products in general, eco products development, how do you take your product and make it more environmentally friendly? I think is an approach that can help a consumer take appropriate decisions on a daily basis.
Right. Thank you. I think that Isha-san, your thoughts on this?
So this has been the discussion of last many COPs. Yeah. And it's not gone the way we wanted it to go. And I just heard it yesterday from one of the professors at Columbia Business School. He said that from complying, second best, so collaborating and coming together and therefore complying to what we're agreeing on, the second best thing is then to compete. But nations are not collaborating. Can we compete on who will do better than the other in terms of reducing carbon footprint? So that seems to be working a little bit. So let's see if that works, and then ultimately we come to some common this thing. But of course, and when it comes to competing and market mechanisms taking over, and therefore it becomes a taramai to say it makes sense for us to grow in a way which is decarbonized, maybe that will work. So of course it's not fair that the nations they've grown and now they've reached a steady state, and now they're saying you don't grow, or you grow in another, in a more decarbonized manner. But if that growth in decarbonized manner, if the technology or the capital or some of it's like 15 years back, if somebody would have said solar prices will be the way they are now, people would have laughed. Versus now they are where it's obvious to use solar because it's cheap for certain things. So I guess if competition brings some of that, so I guess it'll be a combination of collaboration and competition, and because ultimately everybody wants the carbon in the atmosphere to come down and stay at levels which we will be able to withstand. Yes. Otherwise, I showed in one of my slides that how in last 25 years the cost of insurance for extreme weather has become 3 times. So so that's what I think. I feel that just this blame game has not worked. We've been talking about it. Ultimately, at COP27, we did have a conversation about loss and damage fund, but then where's the money coming in from? So I think as it becomes more logical to grow in a decarbonized manner, and the technology can come from China, it can come from US. So if the developed countries can continue to innovate and develop solutions which can be cheaper for the world to pick up and follow, then why not?
Wonderful. The last question to both of you. I know we are exceeding, but this is the last question. So, consumer behavior, that is at Aam Aadmi, so to speak, their behavioral change. You did, Professor Hari, you did give many examples of, for example, waste segregation. So you have both the carrot and the stick. So in the Japanese approach, is the carrot stronger or the stick stronger?
That's a difficult question. Both, I think. Both, I think. But it's a stick that is pretty small. So it is, you assume that you are being hit by the stick, but in reality, because of the consensus approach to decisions that are taken in Japan, it's more of the carrot, in the sense that even before Minamata city implemented that 32 categories of waste, they actually went through a whole process of community consultation, of talking to community groups, community leaders. They created campaigns, they brought in the mass media. All these things happened before even that decision came into the picture. So when it comes to consumer behavior, consumer choice, if you want to call it, I think there is that sense of consultation and discussion. There was one question on the chat: can we do it in India? And I think the trick of Japan to organize these individual and groups into associations, into representative groups, I think is an interesting idea that we can pick up for India.
Right. Thank you. Deeksha-san, what are your concluding thoughts about how we can make it grassroots? Is it because as Professor Hari was mentioning, go to a supermarket, you will not be given a bag, and I think most supermarkets in India are also doing the same. You have to pay X amount of money, maybe $5, something like that, or $10, in order to get a bag. So your behavior is changed automatically. So in a way, that is the danda or the stick. So at the business level, do you think it is the stick which will work better in India, or it is the carrot?
I would say again what he said. It has to be a combination of both. Maybe for that initial pull, that nudge, or getting somebody to think about it, you do need to come in. Things move much faster when it's a regulation. People would otherwise, say, okay, we will do it, versus a regulation puts a timeline in place. And then once people see, okay, this is indeed a good thing, then they pick it up and replicate it to other things. So I would say it has to be a combination, because just forcing also doesn't work, but too much democracy also doesn't work. So it has to be finding that sweet spot. And it could vary for different, maybe for plastic, it had to be more this, and maybe for water conservation, it has to be more. So something more head, something more heart, a combination of head and heart. So I guess that's how you'll have to look at it.
The one negative of legislation is the mechanism to implement. It has to be strong and quick. And, I don't know how powerful it is in Japan, but in India, we get into all types of legalistic bottlenecks. How is it in Japan in terms of?
There there are bottlenecks in Japan also, and there are legal troubles. But it's that consensus system that really sets Japan apart, and it's that they call it public hearings. A lot of these, any policy that the government undertakes has to go through this process of public hearings, of consultation with the appropriate stakeholders and groups. And that's where these associations play a very important role, whether these are business groups, whether these are associations of associations, because the national ministries obviously cannot go down to the local level. They have to depend on these groups to further devolve the message into at the lowest level. And that, I think, is an interesting element, which really is one of the elements of success for Japan, where it has developed a system to evolve and both ways, top to bottom, bottom to top. Messages from the consumers are again carried up into the national policy making process, and vice versa. Now, no national policy is undertaken until it has been, supported by popular opinion and requests.
Thank you. I think it has been a wonderful session. I think people have benefited a lot. And I'm sure that with your permission, any of these participants would like to ask you any questions that they may have directly to you. And that will help them to understand this topic better.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.